Welcome to How to Become a Production SQL Database Administrator. My name is Raphael. In this short video, I'm going to show you the utility called Bulk Copy Program, or BCP for short. It's a utility utilized by SQL DBAs to migrate large amounts of data quickly from either SQL to a file or from file to an SQL table. It's a utility that I personally don't use that much anymore because there's other tools such as the SSIS packages that allow me to migrate data from source to destination. However, if you want a quick snapshot of data and you want to look at it in a Excel sheet or a file, then this is a quick utility you can use. The BCP utility is a command line utility, which means you use the command prompt, and I'll be showing you how to do that in a second. The following functions and the benefits are that the BCP utility can export data from an SQL to a data file, or the vice versa, where you can import data from a data file to an SQL table. And then obviously you can generate various formats of files. As I said, the great advantage of using a BCP is if you want to import or export millions upon millions of rows, then this is a quick way of doing it. And I'll show you that in a second. So as I mentioned, the BCP is accessed by using the BCP command or using a batch file. If you want to set a schedule for importing or exporting of various data to go on an override or something, then certainly you can create a batch file and then create that batch file as a job. And I'll be demonstrating that in a second. As I said, you can use a batch file to set up a schedule. Just notice that BCP is case sensitive, and what the BCP utility works on is what's called switches. And here is a list of the most common switches. Here is actually the syntax you'll be using when you're doing various commands. It's BCP. Now, obviously, you would open the command line and type in the following: BCP, the database name, the schema name, the table name, or the view name, and then you would either use query or in or out to a data file. And then obviously these are the formats you can use. And once I demonstrate that to you, how to use these switches, it'll be easier. I've highlighted obviously the ones that are more common, like the C, which is the format, the database name, the format file, the password, the server name, the capital T. So that's what I mean by case sensitive, that if you use a small or lowercase t than a capital T, then you'll get different functions. So take note of that. And then obviously U for login and so on. So I'm going to be demonstrating that of how to use the BCP in a second. So let's actually begin. I think that's all I want to discuss there. So here's the syntax for you. So the example I'm going to show you right now is I'm going to be using the BCP to export data from SQL table to a flat file using the out command. So here's the syntax that I'm going to be using. I'm going to be using BCP followed by the database name dot schema name dot table name, and whether I want to push it out or into the SQL, and then followed by the path to I want it to go to. And then here is, again, the I'm going to be using slash, or I should say dash, capital T, which means it's a trusted credential. Therefore, I don't have to provide a username or password if I use this switch. Lower C stands for character data type. So here is the actual script that I'm going to be utilizing in the command prompt in a second. And when I do that, you'll see that what's happening. So let's go over this and what it's doing. So the BCP tells the command line that we're going to be using a BCP utility. Then I'm going to be using the SQL2 database. I'm going to be using the schema database DBO. I'm going to be using the table people3. And then I'm saying out, meaning it's going to export data to this directory, which is going to be this. And then obviously I've given it a name, people3.txt. And I'm using a trusted connection, and I'm using character type. So when I copy this, for example, and before I do that, obviously, if you look at the path, you need an existing directory to create, and I've already created this directory. So when I execute this BCP command using the command line property, you'll see that all the data from people3 table in the SQL database will go into a text format right here. So let's look at that. So open your command line property and then go here edit, and paste. And now you can do it. Now, obviously, the other thing is you can manually write this, obviously, one by one. So you would write BCP and so on, but it's easier for me to copy paste it to save time. But you would actually write this. As I said, it's very case sensitive. So if you see any errors, and if it's a small t or when it's expecting a large t, then you'll get errors. So once you write the command that you wish to execute, you just press enter, and there it is. And now you're going to see 100 million rows actually just within like 30 seconds or so being imported. As you can see here, it says 1,000 rows successful and so on and so on. So it's increments of 1,000. And you can see there's a tremendous of data being exported to the text file. And now if I go over here, you'll see that the text file has been created. And it's 400,000 almost, and so on. So you can, as you can see, it's a great utility to export data if you want to do some analysis against some data or in a dev environment to use this utility. However, as I said, with the not the advent, but I usually use SSI packages, which is going to be an entire different course when we're exporting data. But at least you should be aware of the BCP utility and how to operate at least at this fundamental level. So there it is. So it's almost done. And you can see that it's being imported, and there's 100 million rows. So that was pretty quick for 100 million rows. So now I'm going to kill this here, and I'm going to actually kill this also. So now you know, and I don't want to open it up because it may take some time. So now we imported data or exported data from SQL to a text file. Can you do the reverse? Can you take a text file and import it into SQL? And actually you can. So actually let me repeat this since I need this. So actually let me copy this, go back to this. It's always good to paste this and go enter so that's going. So now what I'm going to do is actually take this data, this 100 million rows, and I'm going to dump it into SQL. But before I can use that, obviously, if you go to SQL, and it's going to be going to the database called SQL2, expand the tables, and you'll notice I don't have a table called people4. So the first thing I'm going to do actually is create a table called people4. The other thing to note is obviously you'll have to be aware of the columns and the data type that you're using also when you're using BCP. So that's created. If I go to tables and refresh, and if I right click, you'll see that I don't have any data into this table at all. So now that this is most likely finished, as you can see, it's pretty quick. So let's just minimize that. And now what I'm going to do, obviously, is I'm going to do the reverse, as I said. I'm going to be taking the data from this text command, and then I'm going to dump it into the newly created database. But the only thing I'm doing different is using in instead of out for an export. So now I can copy that, go to here, and do exactly the same thing. Edit, paste, and now with the in, and execute, and so on. So now if I go to my SQL while that's going on, you can see if I let me remove the 1,000th. And I'm going to execute it, but I'm not going to wait for the entire script, as it takes a couple of seconds or about a minute just to retrieve the data, because it is 100 million rows. But just to show you that data has been populated here. So let me just continue with that. And then the next thing I want to show you quickly is obviously you don't have to do the entire data. We don't want to be importing 100 million rows all the time. We can be selective in saying, hey, give me the top 100 or top 1,000 or top 20,000. And that's where query out comes in, the command or the switch. And I'll be demonstrating that to you in 1 second also. So this is almost done. And now if I go to here and execute that select statement, it's almost done. And now if I execute it, you'll see that it's been populated, and that may take a little time to run. So we'll leave that in the background. But I'm going to actually kill it because, as I said, I don't want to waste time doing that. But trust me, you can see there's 681,000 rows already. So that's how you use that. Now, as I mentioned, you can also use if you want to be partial about it, you can use send data from SQL using a query. We don't have to use the entire select all system. You can use the query out. In this particular case, it's exactly the same thing. I'm going to say BCP, but I'm going to say open parentheses or double parentheses, close double, not parentheses, but quotes. And within that, you can write your select statement. So the select statement says, give me the top 100 from the people 3, query out, because we're using a query, into this, into the same directory. So now if I copy this, or actually, you know what? I'm going to show you about batch files. So what is a batch file? A batch file, obviously, if I right click this and edit, you'll notice that the same command that I just went over, I've taken Notepad and I've copied it and pasted it here. And the other thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to save it as a batch file. I'm going to go save as. I'm going to go to my desktop, choose all files because I've already created one. And I'm going to find which one is it? Well, actually, let me look at the query right here. And I'm going to override it. And now what the batch file does, it allows me to actually run this query on a schedule, because now I can create a SQL job, point it to this, and this will run as a schedule. So if I right click this and just run it as an admin and go yes, you'll see that it quickly pops up here immediately. Since there was only 100 records, I can actually open this and see it. So it's not that complicated here, since there was only 100 records here, as you can see. So that allows you to use a query and using a batch. Now again, the same thing I could have done with the batch file here. I could have set this as a job and set this as a job if I want to query in or query out data. So that's basically how you use a BCP utility to import export data very quickly from SQL environment to files and vice versa. And if you want to be selective about the data, then you'll have to use a query out. And I would just encourage you to look at some of these switches and get familiar with it. But basically, here is the format or the syntax that you use, and it's relatively quick. So I don't want to waste too much time on here because, as I said, it's not a utility that I use that much. If I want to import export data, I'm going to use an SSI package, which is far more efficient than this, in my opinion. So I'll just leave it here and we'll continue with the next video. So my name is Raphael, and this is how to become a production SQL database administrator.